politics as we speak. If you've never heard the term skinny repeal or votorama, it's okay. It's understandable you may not, but get ready because that is the story today. Republicans are now focused on a bare bones repeal plan after the Senate rejected a straight repeal of the law and a modified repeal and replace of the law. So the skinny repeal, so-called skinny repeal, would repeal the individual and employer mandates as well as a medical device tax that was in Obamacare. But much of the rest of it would remain in place. The long voting process in the Senate is likely to begin sometime tonight. It might go well into tonight and into tomorrow. The president weighing in on the state of play also this morning, tweeting this. Come on, Republican senators, you can do it on health care after 7 years. This is your chance to shine. Don't let the American people down. There you have it. Joining me now to discuss the state of play, Democratic Congressman and Minority Whip in the House, Congressman Steny Hoyer. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Kate.
So a skinny repeal, if it's passed in the Senate, it gets you all to conference. What then?
Well, I don't know what then, but this is not a skinny repeal in terms of the adverse impact it's going to have on millions of Americans. CBO says immediately 16 million people are going to lose their insurance, but millions and millions more are going to see their premiums substantially increased, even those that have employer-based insurance. So that the impact here is going to be very substantial. But what it indicates is it's certainly not repeal either. It's what the Republicans, after 7 years of trying to put something together, the only thing that they've been able to put together that may pass the Senate. I hope it doesn't pass the Senate. Very frankly, I'd be surprised if Rand Paul votes for this, who said he was for repeal. This is not repeal. And I'd be surprised that more moderate senators who are very worried about the impact in their states and on the people would vote for this. So we'll see. But obviously what they want to do is to get to conference. If they get to conference, my view is they'll get an even worse bill than has been proposed so far. Nothing they have come up with has been appealing to the American public or not been harmful to millions and millions of people who need and want health care.
Well, again, let's see what plays out today and where it heads after this. This morning, I have to ask you, Congressman, the reports of the White House infighting exploded on CNN. The president's director of communications, he's upset about leaks coming from the White House, saying that if the chief of staff is not a leaker, Reince Priebus should explain that for himself. What is your take on it from the outside looking in?
Well, this administration has for 7 months brought us chaos, conflict, and confrontation. This is another stark example of that. How any organization can operate with the conflict and confrontation that has been a daily occurrence in the White House. I'm not too upset that it's harmful to, frankly, the White House staff, but what I'm very concerned about is the risk that it puts our country at and the undermining of our president's and the White House's attention to critical matters confronting this nation, both on the national security level and on the domestic level. But it's just extraordinary. I've been here 36 years, Kate, as you know. I've never seen anything like this out of any White House, Republican or Democrat. It is a stark demonstration of the inability of this White House and this administration to lead this country in a constructive way.
Let's see what happens on Twitter next. On Russia sanctions, Congressman, the House and Senate will soon be sending the sanctions bill to the president for his signature. This is, though, again, the White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, this is what he said about the sanctions bill this morning. Listen to this.
He may sign this. He may sign the sanctions exactly the way they are, or he may veto the sanctions and negotiate an even tougher deal against the Russians.
He may veto it for a tougher deal against the Russians. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is that is totally contrary to what the president's been talking about for the last year and a half, and how Putin is a good president. He's popular. He's a tough leader. He wants to work with him. I don't know where the communications director got this thought that the president has given any indication that he wants to make sanctions tougher. So we'll see whether he signs the bill. But frankly, if he doesn't sign the bill, I think the Congress will clearly and quickly override his veto. This bill is a result of the Congress's conviction that the sanctions levied on the Russians and on the Iranians as well as the North Koreans are appropriate and should stay in place until a deal is made that has Putin back off from Crimea, from Ukraine, from Syria, and the Iranians stop their human rights abuses and their support of terrorism, and that the North Koreans stop pursuing nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver those weapons. So I think it's very clear that the Congress, in a very bipartisan fashion, 98-2, 419-1, overwhelming, and 419-3 in the House on the sanctions bill, that the Congress overwhelmingly is concerned that this president might lift sanctions, not make them tougher, lift sanctions, and wants to make sure that that's not done without the Congress's participation.
We're just getting some breaking news in from Barbara Starr involving the president's announcement banning transgender people from serving in the U.S. military. Barbara Starr is reporting that the Joint Chiefs did not know that the announcement was coming, and also she read a statement from the chairman saying that they're not going to implement the changes until they hear it directly from the president, and it's in consultation with the Secretary of Defense. There are a lot of questions right now about what all this actually means. Do you know?
I don't know, but it is another indication of chaos, conflict, and confrontation. The president, in putting out his tweets, which I think were an appeal to prejudice and division, and not consistent with what the armed forces were asking for, nevertheless said, well, the generals have told me. I don't know which generals he's talking about, but when I hear that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had no idea that he was going to do this, it's another indication that the only reason this was done to appeal to some House members and the Hartzlers of the Congress who wanted to and offered an amendment to discriminate against those transgender members of the armed forces, which was rejected by a bipartisan vote of the Congress. This was an effort to go around the Congress, to not have the courage to face this one more time on the floor of the House of Representatives, in which that amendment would have lost, and do indirectly what they couldn't do directly. It's a shame, it's wrong, and it's shocking that this was not done in consultation with and with the agreement of the leaders of our armed forces.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You bet, Kate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I want to bring in right now CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash. Dana, trying to get to a lot of topics with Congressman Hoyer there, but one of the things that he said, and I wanted to get your take on, is he said in his 30-plus years that he's been in Washington, and that's a few administrations, he's never seen anything like this amount of disarray and infighting that he's seeing in the White House right now. What is Reince Priebus to do today, Dana?
I mean, where do we even start? I think he could have said, in my 30 years, I've never seen the infighting and disarray than I have in the 48 hours. I mean, just think about it.
Right.
Think about just the way that you led your program, Kate. First talking about the idea that Jeff Sessions, his attorney general, is so beleaguered because, as your friend John Berman says, the president did the beleaguering.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been going after him, trolling him, attacking him in public, and now you have a revolt against the president from from Jeff Sessions' former colleagues in the Senate, saying very clearly, cut it out. And you know what? We're the people who are in charge of confirming. We're not going to do anything to help you get a new AG in, which, you know, so there's that. Then you have the idea that the president does what he does with this switch by Twitter of massive policy with regard to transgender military service people without telling the heads of the military, the most senior people. And the White House said yesterday that they were told. Then add to that what you were getting at, which is the White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, the new communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, who clearly has a very tight relationship right now with the president, saying on CNN that they're Cain and Abel. Okay, well, which one is going to be Cain and which one is going to be Abel?
That didn't end well.
It did not end well for Abel.
To say the least. But it does, I am confounded and I stutter because I do wonder, what does Reince Priebus do? Because here is one of the keys of what we heard from Anthony Scaramucci this morning, is that he had just spent 15 minutes prior, had been on the phone with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump had given him the okay to call in and talk about all of this.
Yes. So let's just take a step back. The president, I know from my reporting, and I think it's pretty obvious from his Twitter feed over the past many months, is obsessed with what he calls the leakers. Information getting out about what's going on behind, inside the White House walls, back and forths, and real fights within the White House staff. And he wants to get to the bottom of it. Okay, got it. Anthony Scaramucci clearly, when he came in, said, I got you. I agree with you. And then, you know, there were a couple of stories yesterday that gave Scaramucci even more impetus to do it. And the backdrop of that is that Scaramucci has thought since day one of this administration that Reince Priebus has been leaking things about him to keep Scaramucci out of the White House. About his financial disclosure, about his businesses. Scaramucci has not been shy about telling as many people as he can about that. Priebus denies it, but that's sort of how you have it. But at the end of the day, here's the thing you need to remember. This president, he almost thrives on this kind of chaos. This is how he kind of does his business. And the leaks about White House staff, a lot of that comes from the president himself making calls to friends. What do you think? Should I fire Reince today? Should I fire Sean Spicer? What's going? How's it go? So he does a lot of calling that it's not a leak. Right. But a lot of this is kind of a symptom of the way that the president organizes or doesn't organize his staff from the top down. And what this means for how that organization operates the White House, thus the government, is, I think, a key question right now. Stand by to stand by. Great to see you, Dana. You too. Coming up for us, I'll speak live with a Republican who's also defending Jeff Sessions. But who does he point the finger at for all the drama? You may be surprised. You won't want to miss this. Plus, this morning, a man who says Russia wants him dead, testifying before the Senate, connecting the dots on the infamous Donald Trump Jr. meeting, why he says that was a Russian intelligence operation.
On my travels across the country, I came across this.
There were crucial votes in Congress. Trump team members behind closed doors in the Russia investigation. The President of the United States again lashing out his own Attorney General. The fate of Jeff Sessions' job is very much in limbo tonight, but as of a few days ago, he was determined to stay put. CNN has confirmed Sessions' chief of staff told Reince Priebus that the Attorney General had no intention of stepping down. That conversation happened over the weekend. The president has criticized Sessions several more times since then, right up to today. Sarah Murray is in Youngstown, Ohio, where the president had a rally tonight. She joins me. So, Sarah, the president finishing up the rally there a short time ago. I'm curious, did he mention Sessions? Because he's talked about him now several times today.
That's right. He was asked about him several times today and seemed to intentionally leave him out there twisting, not giving any kind of answer about whether he wanted Sessions to step aside or whether he might fire Sessions. So, of course, we were all waiting to see if Trump would unleash on his attorney general here at his rally in Youngstown, Ohio. He was clearly feeding off the crowd, but he didn't mention Sessions by name. Here's what President Trump did have to say about presidential behavior, though.
Sometimes they say he doesn't act presidential. And I say, hey, look, great schools, smart guy. It's so easy to act presidential, but that's not going to get it done. In fact, I said, it's much easier, by the way, to act presidential than what we're doing here tonight, believe me. And I said, with the exception of the late, great Abraham Lincoln, I can be more presidential than any president that's ever held this office. That I can tell you.
Now, clearly, President Trump has been taking some flack, including from members of his own party, for his treatment of Jeff Sessions. That seemed like a not very veiled riff about exactly what was going on there. As for Sessions' fate, though, Trump gave no clue as to which way he was leaning. Anderson.
All right, Sarah Murray, Sarah, thanks. Joining me now is the Wall Street Journal reporter Michael Bender, who interviewed the president and asked him about Attorney General Sessions. Michael, thanks for being with us. So, Attorney General Sessions obviously was the first sitting senator to endorse the president during the campaign. You had a fascinating exchange with him about Sessions and about loyalty and about that early endorsement. What did he say?
Well, we tried to ask him a couple of times about what he was going to do with Sessions, and he wouldn't take the bait. He just kept saying he was disappointed. And then he started talking a little bit about White House personnel and mentioned Anthony Scaramucci, actually, first, who's his new communications director. And what Trump wanted to do was retell the story about how Scaramucci didn't endorse Scott Walker first in the presidential campaign. When Walker quit, he endorsed Jeb Bush. When Jeb Bush quit, there wasn't a whole lot of options left, and he endorsed Trump. And what Trump said was, well, Scaramucci came to me first and offered his support, but I wasn't ready to run. So it's really important to know that he wanted to endorse Trump first. And then almost right after that, he offered up this anecdote about how Sessions endorsed him. Not only was he the first senator to endorse him, he was the only senator throughout the entire primary process to back Donald Trump. I mean, it was an influential, it was a big moment in that primary campaign. But Trump said that, well, you know, I drew 30,000, and in Trump's math, he said 40,000 people to Mobile, Alabama. Sessions, who's from Alabama, looks at that crowd and says, you know, I might as well endorse him.
And basically, and I think Trump also said something to the words to the effect of, it wasn't a loyal thing. It wasn't a loyalty thing. It was basically, I mean, basically he's saying that Sessions jumped on the Trump train because he saw a large crowd.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, Jeff Sessions is a politician. You know, I'm sure there was some calculation, and he's probably not 100% incorrect there. But, you know, Sessions backed Trump because of a philosophical alignment with what Trump was saying, particularly on immigration, at a time when the almost entirety of the party, certainly in Washington, was criticizing what Trump was saying. So, I mean, they lined up perfectly back then, which is why Sessions endorsed Trump over Ted Cruz, which you remember back then was a big blow to Ted Cruz, who's trying to win the South, trying to win those evangelical voters, and trying to leverage the immigration issue.
Right. I mean, Sessions is also effectively, whether you believe in him or not, or believe in the positions or not, executing the president's policy over the Department of Justice right now. The president also talked about the safety of Robert Mueller's job as well. What did he say?
Well, he kind of left that open too. You know, he wouldn't say what he wanted to do. He said he wanted to see what Mueller did. You know, and which is newsworthy and striking in itself. This is the special counsel. You know, there's a certain level of independence implied in this and expected in this. And Trump is saying that, you know, that he's the one who's going to decide basically whether Mueller is going down the right path or not. You know, he talks about him in the same way he's talking about Sessions. It's not about loyalty for Donald Trump. You know, for all the talk about Trump's loyalty, you know, this is a very transactional president. Not, you know, it's what you've done for me lately, not, you know, not a resume of what you've done for me in the past.
Yeah, Michael Bender, appreciate a fascinating interview today. Thank you. With me now is Maggie Haberman, Jeffrey Lord, Kirsten Powers, Jeffrey Toobin, Bianca Golodriga, Joshua Green, who's the author of the new book Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. Is getting a lot of attention. It's available now. Jeff, I mean, this Donald Trump
over his disappointment on the recusal months ago, directly with him. And so now we're finding it out, and he's dragging this out. He's doing this. I honestly don't think that it helps him with conservatives, you know, because Jeff Sessions is himself.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives coming to Jeff Sessions' defense.
That said, I do understand. You know, I sort of softened on the recusal thing there, but the more I think of this, I think the president's probably right. He shouldn't have recused himself, but he did. I'll leave it to Jeffrey to say whether or not you can unrecuse. If you so choose, you can't.
You can't unrecuse. I mean, the recusal is a voluntary act. I mean, there is no law requiring recusal, but once you recuse yourself, I mean, it makes no sense to unrecuse yourself.
It's also interesting you have, like, you know, Rudy Giuliani saying he was right to recuse himself.
And Mitch McConnell and half the Republicans in the Senate. The reason they say he was right to recuse himself is that he was right to recuse himself. I mean, that is not a close legal question. The only person who thinks he was wrong is Donald Trump. Now, admittedly, he's an important person in this equation, but I mean, on the merits, I think there's just not this is not a complicated or difficult question.
And Joshua, I mean, your focus of your book's on Steve Bannon, but you write a lot about Jeff Sessions as well, because he was important during the campaign.
Well, he was. I mean, he was the heart and soul of Trumpism before Trumpism ever existed. I mean, Sessions was out, 10, 15 years ago fighting against things like immigration reform. It points in the 2013 bipartisan immigration reform effort. Sessions was sometimes the lone vote in favor of immigration amendments, so aggressive that even people like Ted Cruz couldn't support him. So this guy is the heart and soul of what Trump believes. And I'd imagine it'd have to be very painful to him to be enduring this drawn-out ritual public humiliation from a guy he bent over backwards to support.
And I remember interviewing Sessions right after the Access Hollywood tape came out, where some within the Trump camp wouldn't even defend him and go on television. And Jeff Sessions defended him and said, listen, the man has changed. This was 10 years ago. This is not what he's focused on right now. So I think it's a bit ironic for the president to say, oh, well, the only reason he's rallying, or he was rallying around me, was because he saw crowds. Jeff Sessions literally stood by this man when others didn't.
In fact, more than stood by him, and it's a really important point, had this whole conversation with Reince Priebus, now the chief of staff, who's having this conversation with Jeff Sessions, chief of staff, about whether Jeff Sessions will leave. When Reince Priebus had asked Trump, as the chairman of the Republican National Committee, to consider dropping out of the race, and Jeff Sessions had said to Priebus, according to a bunch of people familiar with that conversation, let's wait and see how this plays out. Let's wait and see what happens. Do not rush to judgment. There were not a lot of people doing that, to your point, and he did do it. And so, again, this question of what loyalty means to the president, somebody emailed me a very good point during the break before. This is not about loyalty for the president, it's about fealty. He demands fealty, and that is what he wants in his attorney general. He wants him to prove some level of fealty to the president, which is not what the attorney general's job is supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that all these people are self-interested. It's not, Jeff Sessions wasn't doing something out of the goodness of his heart for Donald Trump. He was doing it because it was good for him. It was because he saw Trump as being a vessel for his worldview, right? And so this was his way to get a person in the White House who shared his views on some very critical issues that he cared a lot about, and to get into a position like he's in right now. And so I think that, the idea that any of these people are particularly loyal to each other, I don't think they are. They're loyal to themselves and their own interests. And, if Donald Trump hadn't been espousing the views that he liked, he wouldn't have gotten behind him. It's that simple. And so, the truth is Donald Trump owes him a lot. There's no question that, Jeff Sessions getting on board with the campaign was better for Donald Trump probably than it was for Jeff Sessions. It was kind of a risk for Jeff Sessions. But ultimately, these are all people who are just operating in their best own interests.
Generally, these relationships are transactional, but I really do believe that Sessions believed in Trump's policies and did take a big risk. Sessions thought at the time that he had been punished, passed over for the chairmanship of the Budget Committee, a very powerful committee after Republicans won back the Senate in 2014, as punishment from his own party's leaders for being so aggressive on immigration and some of these things. He was very worried that if he did endorse Trump and Trump lost, which I think at that point in time most people expected he would, that he would pay a real price. I think Sessions, more than almost anybody else in Trump's orbit, really did kind of take a leap of faith because he believed in what Trump purported to stand for.
And the president's rationale that he continues to espouse, and that Jeff Sessions should have told him early on that he was going to recuse himself in any sort of Russia investigation, because had he done that he would have never appointed him to be attorney general, just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, this all happened after the fact, and nobody knew what would end up coming out bit by bit by bit as far as this administration and this campaign's affiliations with Russians.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have more of the conversation ahead. Later, an emotional moment in the Senate. Senator John McCain returning to Washington shortly after brain surgery to cast a crucial vote in the healthcare fight. Furthering attacks on Attorney General Jeff Sessions coming from the president. And to think it wasn't that long ago in Alabama, Sessions was the first sitting senator to endorse Trump, who introduced him like this at a rally.
I think of a great man, and I want to just introduce you to him for a second. Do you know who I'm talking about? Who am I talking about? Nobody knows right now, because we've kept it a surprise. Senator Jeff Sessions.
Wow, what a crowd this is.
Back now with the panel. Maggie, I mean, just in terms of the president's mindset, what does it say that he so easily, it seems, went from that to where he is now?
It says that he is exactly the same person that we have known for the last 3 years, and that he is the same person he was before that. He's a deals guy. Everything is all about making deals. Everything is a transaction. I think Michael Bender alluded to that before, and that's absolutely true. And he sees everything in terms of a sliding scale of what can be done for him. If someone is useful to him at any given moment, they're terrific and they're a wonderful person. If they are not, he has this habit, as I think we've seen repeatedly, when he wants to seek distance from someone, such as with Paul Manafort, it's suddenly, I barely know that person. Paul Manafort was his campaign chairman, and then he started inching away from him in a pretty pronounced way. This is just who he is and how he is. I think anyone who's surprised by how he's treating Jeff Sessions should only be surprised that he is doing it from the West Wing, not that he's doing it at all.
But it's fascinating to me that he does this stuff from a distance, that he talks in front of a crowd about Jeff Sessions, but he actually doesn't talk to Jeff Sessions' face.
But, I mean, first of all, we don't actually know what their private conversations are, number one. Sure. Number two, we do know that Jeff Sessions, and this I continue to not understand, to your question about what's real and what's not here, and what's known and what's not. Jeff Sessions offered his resignation several weeks ago,
right,
and the president wouldn't take it. Yes, and the president wouldn't take it. So I don't know why it is that now the president is sort of tormenting him. I don't know if there is something the president has learned about where Mueller is going, or if there's something else related to this investigation that concerns him, but it has heated up again.
Jeff, if Jeff Sessions did step down, resign, or was fired, how damaging would that be for the president in terms of his base? Because the one thing one can say all along is that, you know, the president's base has held. This is the first time you're hearing rumblings from, you know, hardcore supporters of the president saying, do not do this to Jeff Sessions.
Right. I do think there might be a bit of a problem with that. And more to the point, I think it would be hell on wheels to get a successor appointed, because he would want to, if he did this, get somebody like, to pick a name at random, not so at random, Ted Cruz. Well, you know, in that kind of environment, I think it would be almost impossible, or if not just very difficult, to get Ted Cruz or someone of that those conservative bona fides approved. One of the other things here, I mean, I think he's really mad. He sees this as an assault on his presidency, that he won the election fair and square. He's the outsider, and as Rush Limbaugh was saying today, others have said there was a silent coup here with the Washington establishment trying to take him out. And I think he is very aware of that. I think Gary Tuchman's report shows that there are a lot of people out there that really believe in him, and they see that there's an assault.
You know why they believe in him? Because according to the president, he's the second best president in the history of the United States after Abraham Lincoln. I mean, I think
second most presidential.
Second most presidential. He says so many crazy things that we don't even pay any attention. Can you imagine what he said tonight?
Well, it's like the Boy Scout stuff too. Yesterday, it's like, I mean, people are.
I mean, it's just like, what? Who talks that way?
But Jeff, there's the disconnect.
I know. You're in touch with the people in Pennsylvania.
Well, no.
The people think he's the second best president in history, right?
I think a lot of people think that he is a great president, that he's doing a great job. That is I mean no disrespect, that's just the disconnect here between loosely Washington media, New York elites, and America.
Those of us here on 58th Street, we're so out of touch. We think Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Franklin Roosevelt are better, and you know what fools we are.
Well, it isn't even that though, but it's not. His approval rating is 36%. So I think that if we're suggesting that he is doing something that has overwhelming popularity, that isn't true. Number one, and number two, I mean, it doesn't mean that if there's a binary choice of him versus another person in 2020 that he doesn't win again. He may very well. But suggesting that he is somewhere that he isn't is a problem. And as he has often said, oh, these polls are fake. Number one, number two. In terms of silent coup, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but he has an inability to not turn all of these institutions into something personal and something about him. This is not an investigation into an attack on democratic institutions during the election is not somehow a delegitimizing of him. He sees it that way.
Well, he sees it that way, and there are a lot of people that, I mean, I was never in favor of
but his own national security establishment doesn't see it that way.
Well, look, I mean, what we have here is a problem where you've got, when Archibald Cox was fired, the media made him a saint. By the time Ken Starr was doing this, they went after
But how
Ken
much
Starr.
influence does he even have in his own national security council? I
And
mean, the acting attorney, the acting FBI director, he accused of corruption today, based on something to do with his wife.
For the second time, he did that with us in an interview last week. Dan Coates, his director of national intelligence, said last week that there is no disagreement among the national security apparatus. This is a Trump appointee. There's no disagreement that Russia intervened in the election and tried to meddle in the election. It is the president who has refused to accept that. So I guess I don't understand why that's the media's fault.
We got to take a quick break, though. We're going to have more with the panel. Breaking news in the Russia probe, why the Senate Judiciary Committee is dropping its subpoena. Former campaign chairman Paul Manafort coming up.
The most trusted name in news.
There's breaking news tonight. The Russia investigation. The Senate Judiciary Committee is dropping its subpoena. The president's former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and he'll no longer need to appear at tomorrow's hearing. That's according to a source close to the matter, who adds the two sides have agreed to continue talking. The decision comes after Mr. Manafort spoke to the Senate Intelligence Committee today. Meanwhile, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, was back on Capitol Hill for a second day in a row, this time to talk with the House Intelligence Committee. Democratic Congressman Jim Himes is part of that panel. I spoke to him before we went on air. Congressman, did your committee learn anything new from Jared Kushner today? Anything beyond his comments in the statement he released yesterday?
We did, as you might anticipate, in whatever it was, 3+ hours of questioning. We got a lot of detail on many of the things that he mentioned in his written testimony, which we all saw yesterday. So yeah, I do think we learned, as would be expected, a fair amount of detail.
Chairman Conway said his answers were forthcoming and complete. He also said he satisfied all my questions. Do you agree with that?
I will tell you that Mr. Kushner really made a good faith effort, and he came here voluntarily. He told us repeatedly over the course of the deposition that he was willing to stay as long as it took, and so I kind of welcome that attitude. We haven't seen that from all of the people involved in or possibly involved in this investigation. Whether it was complete or not. An investigation is a lengthy thing. We've got to sort of cross-check testimony by a witness like Mr. Kushner against what we know from other witnesses, so I don't really want to opine on comprehensiveness and completeness. But I will tell you that I think Mr. Kushner made a strong, good faith effort to answer the committee's questions today.
The chairman also said he had no reason to have, at this point, Kushner come back before the committee. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's a little early to answer that question. Again, we're looking forward to having a number of other witnesses. Just to give you an example, the sort of the lead story now on the whole question of possible links to Russia is the president's son, Don Jr.'s admission that he had that meeting at which Jared Kushner was present, and he confirmed that and gave us some more details. But obviously, we've got to hear from the other people in that meeting as to exactly what happened. So, again, it's a little early to draw any conclusions about the testimony. But as I said before, it was good that he came forward with an attitude of answering whatever questions we had for him.
Does it seem credible to you that Donald Trump Jr. would get an email in which he's told that Russia is backing his father in the election and not tell anybody else about it? I mean, not mention it to his father, not mention it to Jared Kushner or Paul Manafort or anybody else?
Well, there's certainly at least two areas of questions that I have. Number one, and using Don Jr.'s own words, I think he said, "I love it. I love the idea that there may be some incriminating information on Secretary Clinton." That means we need to understand exactly what was offered, exactly what was taken, and any follow-up that might have come out of that meeting. Again, "I love it" suggests that you go into that meeting, as Don Jr. I expect would have done, with the expectation that you were going to get something pretty hot, pretty valuable. And of course, he did invite Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, who were the most senior members of the campaign. So for me, the question is, okay, what came next? What was said in that meeting? What was promised? What was delivered? What was the follow-up?
What is next for your committee?
Well, we have a schedule of witnesses who will come in. Some are sort of minor players in this overall tale. Some of whom are not, people like Paul Manafort. And we're in the process now of negotiating the timing. And remember, before we bring a witness in, and this is the one sort of discordant note I would raise about Jared Kushner's testimony today, it probably came a little bit early in the sense that somebody who was that senior to the campaign, you'd like to have had the opportunity to really go through the documents in an extensive and comprehensive way. But the timing was offered, we took it, and we will continue to both review documents and bring those witnesses in.
Congressman Himes, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks, Anderson.
Back now with the panel. I mean, Maggie, there are a lot of players now who are going to be heard from who are no longer with the Trump campaign. I mean, you have Paul Manafort, you have Carter Page. Is that, are you hearing anything that's a concern for people in the White House?
No, I mean, look, I think that the more sort of ancillary the circle gets, the harder it gets to control. But you also have people like Roger Stone, who has this very lengthy relationship with President Trump, who's going at some point going to be appearing. His testimony was canceled. I think that they are, in general, concerned not just about the fact of what could be said, because I think that, you know, when you talk to them, they insist that there won't be anything there. But there is a concern about the closed-door nature of these appearances so far, and that there is no transcript provided. So the question then becomes what leaks out from what is said behind closed doors, which can very much sort of set the tone going forward, at least in terms of public opinion.
And Anderson, we focus always on these witnesses, you know, which witness is coming in, which witness spoke. These cases are almost always won or lost or broken or not broken on documents, on emails, on any sort of record. I mean, think about the one big piece of news that we had. It was the emails setting up the June 2016 meeting. Those are going to tell the story because witnesses can tailor their stories, they can forget. Emails are going to, and the question I have, and I don't really know the answer yet, is how much access to the emails the congressional committees have.
I've asked that question, and no one really seems to say.
And Mueller will certainly be able to subpoena anything he wants, and there are no privileges attached. There's no classified information issue. He is really going to be able to have the emails, and those will, I think, tell the story even more than any witness testimony.
And also who, if anybody, took notes during that meeting last June, and there had been some speculation as to whether that was indeed Manafort and whether that was something Manafort would be willing and open to turning over. So the question still remains, but given the number of people in the room and the nature of that meeting, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the people, one of the 8, if not more, did take notes and document what was
thus far, we've had another day here with no there there. I mean, we're listening to a Democratic congressman say that he was relatively pleased, and that's because Jared Kushner has nothing to hide. There's nothing there, and they keep looking for this, and every day that they come up empty, I mean, this is the source of the president's
But isn't
anger,
this, I mean, this is how investigations work. You can't say on every day, well, there's nothing today, that means there's nothing there.
Well, but I think they also like the fact that he's actually being transparent. You know, that they're welcoming the fact that he's coming up and or at least seeming to be transparent. He's laying out a lot. He's giving some explanations for things that we knew one side of the story before, and he's provided another side of the story. I think in some cases he's given some plausible explanations for some of the things, why he wanted to have the secure line, for example, which originally looked very suspicious and looks less suspicious with his explanation. All that said, these are his explanations. They're not, I mean, this is his story, and there has to be some sort of follow-up to make sure
and the idea that nothing has been learned. I mean, remember, the president, the vice president, we've heard them all say for months, there's no evidence that there were any connections between the campaign and the Russians. Nothing at all. The whole thing is fake news. The whole thing is a joke. Then the emails come out of the June meeting, and suddenly Jay Sekulo's on television saying, well, there's no crime here. That's a big difference.
Well, there is
that's
no
a big
crime here.
Well, there may or may not be, but it just the story has changed because new facts are being developed.
It's the partisan nature of this. The very fact that there is no investigation of Hillary Clinton on this, and her Russian ties.
Why? Because she might run for city council in Chappaqua.
No, look.
What do you care?
Because if the subject is Russian meddling in the election, she was the other candidate, right? So what are her ties?
But it's been established, Jeffrey, that Russia was trying to help Donald Trump. So I don't understand what would Hillary be doing. That doesn't even make sense. And I think the other problem is, I think, you know, Donald Trump really acts like the victim in all of this. That, you know, why is everybody so interested in this Russia thing and this Russia investigation when, in fact, the intelligence community has said that Russia tried to swing our election? And Donald Trump has never expressed any interest in actually investigating that. And had he done that, I think people would be a lot less suspicious of him. And if his, you know, when you have people who work for him saying, we've never inquired about this, we don't even want to know what happened, we've never asked. I mean, that's...
I think there's one other variable here. We don't know what happens in this closed-door testimony, at least not until somebody leaks. But the one thing we can look at is Donald Trump and his behavior and his Twitter feed. And clearly, he is agitated and upset about about the information that he's getting about this hearing, because he's been so fixated on Sessions. And we can see this from his public behavior and in speaking to White House officials. This has been going on privately before it kind of broke out into the public.
And now that he's bringing up Hillary Clinton again, which is something he had dismissed a long time ago, and that also sort of...
I don't think it's these hearings. I think it's two things. I think one is Mueller and the scope of what Mueller is doing. And what you have heard White House aides, particularly the White House counsel's office, get very concerned about over the last 2 months has been the degree to which Robert Mueller's office is beginning to look like a finance crimes office. Like that is what they are looking at. Well, I don't know if it's mission creep, but I think that is what the type of specialist that he is hiring. So there's one thing that concerns them. And the other is, don't forget, the prospect this week, it's not happening now, but there was this prospect of Trump's son, his namesake son, openly testifying at a hearing and being asked questions. And Trump's aides were very, very worried about the effect that was going to have on him. So I think the degree to which this is getting close to his family shouldn't be ignored either.
We've got to take a quick break in a moment. Our other breaking news tonight, a key vote to advance the GOP health care bill only barely passes the Senate after the vice president's tie-breaking vote. Now the Democrats are trying to do a stall tactic. The latest on that ahead.
Dave. The average traveller visits loads of different websites before booking their hotel. That's fair enough. You want to make sure you get a great hotel for the best.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions' fate, fear growing on Capitol Hill as a growing number of Republicans are worried about Trump's attack on Sessions, one of those earliest and most loyal supporters. Trump, of course, says, quote, "We will see what happens. Time will tell when it comes to the fate of Sessions." Dana Bash is out front. And Dana, why are Republicans so concerned about this? It actually seems like it's not necessarily about Sessions anymore. It's getting personal.
It is. Look, I mean, first and foremost, Jeff Sessions was one of their own. He was a senator until 7 months ago, 6 months ago, and he was in their caucus. So there's that. I will say that, he certainly wasn't, part of the establishment. He was somebody who kind of chafed against some of the things that Republican leaders did. And he was, certainly part of the conservative wing, which is why it was such a big deal for him to endorse Donald Trump back in the campaign, and why that endorsement and bringing along the base that went with the Jeff Sessions, approval was important to Donald Trump. But where we are right now has been fascinating just to watch it unfold today, Aaron, because despite the fact that he wasn't always sort of buddy with the whole crowd, the Republican senators one by one came out, starting with Lindsey Graham in the morning, to say, you know what? This is wrong. He was right to recuse himself and, basically cut it out. Now, not every senator, as we've seen statements come out throughout the day, has been very focused on the recusal. It's more like, some of them have said, like Tom Cotton, for example, put out a statement. He's a senator from Arkansas saying, he's doing the right thing at the Justice Department. He's fighting crime. He's dealing with immigration. He should stay there. But I think the notion, Aaron, that these senators are being asked, and I had 2 senior Republican senators say this to me in the hallways today, are being asked to walk the plank and do what the president wants them to do on health care. And at the same time, they're seeing the president go after, in a really unprecedented way, his own attorney general, their former colleague, after they believe he was unbelievably loyal to Donald Trump. They're saying, wait a second, how do I know that he's going to have my back? So there's a very real dynamic kind of connecting the health care and the legislative priorities of the president and what they're seeing he's doing to their former colleague.
All right. Thank you very much, Dana Bash. And of course, if that pans out, obviously that's a price the president cannot afford to pay if he wants to get anything passed, right? Whether it's health care or his budget reform, the wall. Out front now, Democratic Senator from Massachusetts, Ed Markey, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And Senator, I appreciate your time tonight. Look, it's the 6th day in a row the president has bullied his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, denigrated him twice today in the Rose Garden, obviously. And the president says, we'll see what happens. Time will tell, right? Not going to say whether he's going to keep him or not. What's your reaction, Senator?
Well, you don't have to be Dick Tracy to figure out what's going on. First, Donald Trump fires Jim Comey. Now he is asking Jeff Sessions essentially to resign, and with kind of a sort of Damocles threat that if you don't, you'll be fired. And it's all heading towards Robert Mueller and his investigation. That's what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. It's about the Russian investigation and these footsteps that keep getting closer to the Oval Office. So what the president is doing is basically setting the stage for a constitutional crisis. He's setting the stage for this entire city and country to head into a political twilight zone. Where he is repeating the history of Richard Nixon and his Saturday Night Massacre, of Archibald Cox and Elliot Richardson. And unfortunately, we know how that ended. And so this is playing out not exactly, but very closely down the line with the Nixon years. And it is really going to be an issue that brings Democrats and Republicans together.
Okay, so I understand that you and Donald Trump have very different reasons for thinking what may be the same thing, but I must ask you this. Look, you, Senator Markey, have been so critical of Attorney General Sessions. You voted against his nomination. You called on him to resign when he admitted he failed to disclose those meetings with the Russian ambassador. You demand that he be investigated over his role in the firing of Jim Comey. I mean, look, this is a guy it would seem you would be happy to see go.
Listen, I make no bones about it. I voted against Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General of the United States, but this is
directly on Glass.